Hello, Hub City kids. I hope you are doing well. I miss you so much. I had a couple of great emails and text messages last week of your pictures of roosters, and they made me so happy to know that you are out there and that you are watching this and that you are coloring roosters and remembering Jesus. And I would absolutely love anytime you want to send me a picture. It doesn't even have to be of a rooster. You can text them to me if you have my phone number, or you can email me at kids@albanyhubcity.com. I would absolutely love those. So we are going to start today by reading this passage as a family. We are in John chapter 20. And last week, if you remember, we left with Jesus dead and buried in his tomb. But I reminded you that, spoiler alert, Jesus does not stay dead. So today is the day we get to remember that he did not stay dead and that he defeated death and that he rose again. So why don't you pause this video and you are going to read chapter 20 together. It's a long chapter, but I know you guys can sit through it. And when you are done, practice telling each other what you remember from it. And remember, you can use those little headings in your ESV Bible and in the NIV, I think it's even there, where it says a title that can help you remember what that passage was about. So, ready to pause? Was that the same crazy face I did last week? I can't remember. I only have so many crazy faces. So, I don't know if you paid attention to this, but there was one word that kept repeating itself over and over again in chapter 20. Did you hear it? It was the word believe. And if you've been listening to John and all of what we've been talking about John for 3 years, that is actually the title of this whole sermon series is Believe. And Mr. Randall has used the word pisteo over and over again because that's what the whole book of John is about. It's about believe. And in this passage, in this chapter of John 20, he uses that word 7 times is what I counted. And anytime the Bible repeats a word over and over and over again, it's a really good idea to pay attention to that word and what it means. So, do you know what the word believe means? I looked it up in the dictionary because when I don't know what a word means, that's where I go. And it says it's to know something is true even when you don't have proof. So proof means to be able to show something to somebody without a doubt that it exists. So I can say this apple is red, and you can see, clearly I don't have a red apple, but you could see that the apple is red because you have proof of that. Do we know that for Jesus? No, because none of us have seen Jesus. There are a lot of things that we know but can't really be proven. Like, I know I love my children, but I don't really have any proof that I love them. They know I love them, even though I do things like take care of them and tell them that I love them. There's not really anything to prove that I love them. There's nothing they can hold that shows the amount of love that I have for them. So take a minute and talk about, as a family, what are some things that you believe in? Remember, you don't have proof to believe in them. So take a minute and discuss that. In this passage, we have 4 sections. The first one tells us that Jesus' followers went to his tomb and the stone was already rolled away. And you know what they found in there? Just a pile of rags. Think of like a mummy. We just finished Halloween, and they would wrap a body in all of those rags. And instead of finding Jesus wrapped in those rags, they just found, interestingly, a pile of them and all the parts that his head that were nicely folded on that table. How did they feel about that? Do you remember what their reaction was? The men just ran back home. I'm sure they were shocked. Can you imagine how shocked you would be? And Mary Magdalene just sat there and cried. She was so sad. And it says in this that they didn't run away because they were excited that Jesus rose from the dead. They ran away because they were shocked, and Mary was there crying because they thought somebody stole Jesus' body. it says that they didn't believe yet because they didn't understand the scriptures. Because Jesus has been saying this from Genesis, that he was going to die and come back alive, and they just didn't understand that yet. So then Mary is standing at the tomb crying really hard because someone took dead Jesus' body. And then what happened? Jesus himself came before her, and he asked her why she was crying. And she thought it was the gardener. He was standing there. She looked at him. She heard his voice. She had a conversation with him. And then she accused him of stealing his own body. And then he said her name, and she believed. But she saw him and still didn't believe initially. And then we go to Jesus appearing in front of his disciples, and they are all in a room. And how are they feeling in that room? It says the room is locked, and they are scared because Jesus, all of the people who wanted to kill Jesus, are still out there, and they're still angry. And we know from Peter's reaction before that he was so afraid that he told everybody he didn't even know Jesus. And so now they're all together, and they're hiding. And they're afraid for their lives, and they're afraid for what's going to happen. Does that sound like belief that Jesus is going to come back? Not so much. And Jesus, what does he do? He walks through a wall and appears before them and says, "Hey, guys." And they all immediately believe, and they're so excited that they see him. But they saw him and immediately recognized him. But then Thomas later, they said, "Thomas, we saw Jesus." And what does he say? He said, "I don't buy it. Unless I can see him and stick my fingers in the holes where that nail went and in the side where the sword pierced his side, then I won't believe." So, then what happens? 8 days later, by the way, can you imagine what those disciples were feeling for those 8 days? That suddenly Jesus appears before them and says, "I'm alive," and then he's gone again for 8 days? That would be kind of crazy and weird. And Jesus appears before them again and sees Thomas. And what does Thomas do? He puts his fingers in the hole in Jesus' hand, and then he believes. And what does Jesus say to him? He says, "Great that you believed me. Blessed are those who believe without ever seeing," who didn't put their fingers in the holes in my hands, which I think is kind of gross anyway. So spend some time talking about as a family, what are the difference between those three interactions? We saw Mary see Jesus and think it was the gardener, even after talking to him. Then we see the disciples who saw him walk through a wall and then believe. And then we saw Thomas, who needed to see Jesus and put his fingers in his hands and touch him and have proof that it was actually Jesus. And then us. There's a difference in the way we get to believe in Jesus too. So what are the difference between those three interactions? And then what's the difference between our interaction with him? What do these interactions teach you about Jesus? Something I love about these passages is that they all have a different experience with Jesus. Jesus shows us by coming down from heaven and dying on the cross and being with us that he comes down to be with us, that he loves us so much that he's willing to step out of paradise to come and meet us where we are. And I think that's beautiful, and that teaches me so much about Jesus. All of these different people, did they believe immediately? Even in the upper room where they saw him, they didn't remember that he was going to come back. They didn't believe until they saw him. And did Jesus stop loving any of them? No, he didn't. So what does this say about us? How many of you can raise your hands if you want, even though I can't see them. How many of you have ever seen Jesus walk through a wall? I haven't. How many of you have stuck your hands right in the middle of the hole in Jesus' hands? I definitely have not. How many of you have seen Jesus walking down the street and called him a gardener and accused him of stealing his own body? Definitely not. None of us have ever touched Jesus. We have never talk to him as he's standing in front of us. But does that mean that we can't believe? No. We are what Jesus talks about, that blessed are those who believe in me without ever seeing. So, what does this say? What does this teach you about Jesus and about you? What does this teach you about belief? I know that I love Jesus. I have never seen him. I have never felt him. I have never touched him. But I see his creation, and I see my children laughing, and that teaches me about Jesus and how much he loves me. I see how many times I have been sad and hurt and angry, and I've cried out to God, and he has come and he has met me where I was and protected me and kept me safe and told me that he loves me. So I believe, even though I've never seen. He loves us so much that he came to us just the way we needed him to, only so that we can believe. So, even though we can't see him, we see the things that he has done for us, and those can be little reminders for us that he is real and that he loves us and that he is bigger than death and bigger than troubles and bigger than fear, and if you've watched VeggieTales, bigger than the boogeyman too. So for our craft today, we are going to make a little telescope to remind us that even though we can't see Jesus, we can see all of the things that he made. So there's lots of different ways that you can make this telescope. I used a toilet paper roll because I have 100 million of them at my house, but I'm sure you can be creative with using different recycled goods to make a telescope of your own choosing. There's also a couple of different ways you can do this. You can just decorate it, have some markers. I'm going to put a little heart on mine. Super fancy telescope right here. But a heart is one of the few things that I can actually draw well. So I can use it like this and just have a cool telescope, or I can get some paper at the end. I have tissue paper. You could use construction paper or probably tin foil and a pen. A pin with an eye would probably work better. But look, now I have constellations I can look at. There's all sorts of ways for you to use your imagination and create something really fun and exciting and recyclable that's going to remind us of all the things that we can see that are sort of like proof that Jesus exists, even though we can't touch him or see him. So, thank you for joining me this morning, Hub Kids. I miss you, and I hope to see your faces in person soon. And I would love to get some pictures of you using your fancy telescopes and what you decided to do. Have a great week.